Welcome, everybody, to Samudra Shakti Online. I am so glad that you are with us this evening. Samudra Shakti Online is brought to you by a planning team. It's Maduri Martin and myself. Maduri's out west in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And I'm Lisa Long. I'm on the East Coast of the United States in Florida. So Samudra Shakti Online originated out of a live event in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And it was such a Shakti-filled event in 2019. We wanted to keep that energy going. And so from before the pandemic and through it, we have been live once a month on the second Sunday of every month, creating live continuing education. And we are heading back to Estes Park, Colorado for another live gathering in fall of 2023. And we just wanted to let you know that. We really hope that you'll join us. It's another year away in 2023. And you can join our watch list. You can just hold your phone up and scan that QR code, and it'll open up a web page where you could fill out a little form, and then we could send you an email when we have more details on our event in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. So tonight we have Christina Sell joining us, and she's presenting sequencing strategies for peak poses. Christina is well known for her precise teaching style and her intelligent sequence strategies. She was certified in Anusara yoga in 2003 and has maintained an active teaching schedule since 1998. She's the author of 3 books on yoga and body image, and she resides in Bellingham, Washington, with her husband, 2 cats, and the world's best dog, Locket. So I'm going to stop this screen share and hand this off to Christina. Welcome, Christina. Thank you so much for joining us on Samudra Shakti Online.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was the most, exuberant reading of my bio in a long time. That was great. All right. All right. So my name is Christina Sell. I'm really happy to be here and to be with you all. And I'm going to use the screen share some too. I don't want to do a death by PowerPoint, but sometimes some visual aids are really useful. Before I dive into our time together, I thought we could begin with a moment of centering, and really sequencing is first things first. And Anusara yoga, community, first things first is to remember our grand purposes of practice and our time together, which we could boil down loosely to knowing who, moving a little bit closer to the deep knowledge of who we are, and feeling empowered and skillful to act from that knowledge. So we do a few moments of centering, and I'll do a brief invocation, and then we'll go onward. So if it's safe for you to close your eyes and or comfortable for you to close your eyes, do that. If not, sit as comfortably as you can in whatever way you can. And give yourself a few deep breaths in and out. And with your next exhale, encourage the exhale to be just a little bit longer than your inhale. And as you exhale, surrender the weight of your legs, your pelvis to the ground or to the chair, to the mat beneath you. And heavy in your seat, firm against the ground. Lift up along the front of your spine and along the back of your spine. up to the top of your head. Without this being a hard or strong action, draw your arms slightly back so that a firmness comes to your upper back and a quality of support right behind your heart. Bring your hands together there in front of your heart. Well, I suggested we might boil down those basic ideals of the practice or purposes of the practice to self-knowledge and align to self-expression. Take a moment and make it yours. Remember for you why you're here, why you practice, why you teach. Whether you're a formal yoga teacher or not, you certainly teach yourself every time you roll out a mat about movement, about breath, about consciousness in and through form. So in that way, we're all yoga teachers. And in that same way, this chant suggests that that true teacher, the true self, lives within and it lives among us. And for me these days, this chant is an affirmation, a description, a reminder of where the game of yoga is pointed and what holds it. What holds the upset, what holds the challenge, what holds the devastation, what holds the joy, the triumphs, and the moments of exaltation. It's a description of what's highest, what's deepest, broadest, and most profound. I encourage you, feel for it within yourself. What holds it all for you? Let's do one Om. Inhale. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Sachidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shandaya Niralambaya Tejase Bow your head to your heart, lower your hands to your legs, lift your chin, and open your eyes. All right, great. So onward we go. Many of you have studied this in your Anusara yoga immersions or in your various yogic studies out in different systems and different schools, about a flow of energy that moves from the very biggest to the highest to the deepest, to the realm of consciousness where no preposition is good enough to describe how big it is, our relationship to it. So it's beneath us, it's above us, it's through everything, and it's the everything. And that everything in this system we might look at as consciousness. It's a little dry for me. I use a different name, but let's go with this. And this great consciousness that is all that is, the Om Namah Shivaya, the consciousness that we gave reverence to moments ago, steps down into our own personal consciousness. This is review for many of you, and it's a very simple way to set a stage. And then it comes into our own awareness, and this is what I want to talk about with sequencing. Because in any given moment, like right now, you might be aware of all kinds of things. You know, I'm aware that I'm a little thirsty. I'm aware that my feet are a little chilly, probably because I'm a little nervous, and just I'm aware of all kinds of things, like a hum in the room from the electricity and so forth. And then from that awareness, I'm going to put my attention on being present for you all. And then I'm going to focus in and refine that even further to pay attention to the degree of focus on my presentation and on getting through these slides with some clarity and hopefully some humor, so that it's not a death by bullet points or a death by PowerPoint kind of experience. And why I wanted to say this is that in alignment-oriented yoga, sometimes by the time you get into some of the technicalities of move your thigh this way, lift your chest this way, put your arm here, do this, no, not that, no, too much, and all of that technique, it can be so oriented and so focused and pinpointed at times that sometimes if you don't have an eye for it or for a taste for it, it can feel like we did this whole chant, like what's up with, what about my big toe? How does that even relate to God? You know, that this was yoga, not PT, you know? and there are plenty of times that I teach a technical class that could be very down the road, sometimes not always perfectly woven with a heart-based theme to keep the whole thing alive, and all of the you know, perfect application of those teaching methods. But one of the things when I first heard Paul Mueller talk about this, that the process then of placing our focus on something starts to cultivate a relationship with our attention. And a great yogic precept is that that prana, life, our life force follows attention. And that might sound kind of yogic, but it's also very practical if you think about it, right? If you are paying attention to feeling less than, guess what? Everywhere you go, you're going to find it. If you're paying attention to jealousy, we're consumed by it. My life force goes into jealousy. If I'm paying attention to my breath, I tend to be a little calmer. If I pay attention to love, I tend to feel more loving. So prana follows attention. It's a long-standing, good yogic principle to work with. And by focusing on my breath, or focusing on my inner big toe as it relates to my sternum, or by the bottom tips of my shoulder blades, moving into the back of my heart, I'm starting to train my capacity for focus, which is putting me into a relationship with my attention. And then I'm having this whole channeling, purposeful relationship and conscious relationship with something that can take me to a greater field of awareness. Then I start to understand not just how my body works, and not just how to move my body and activate the muscles. And I'm starting to have a relationship with my own consciousness. And that the thread of that goes all the way to the heart of God. So I'm going to go down to focusing on some very picky, in my opinion, my perspective, that's how I'm presenting. Okay, you don't have to agree with me, but that a debate about that would be for another topic probably. But to me, that's what holds it all. It's consciousness is holding it all. And then inside ourselves, I'm not looking for always feeling good. I'm looking for a relationship of the part of me that's big enough to hold with a quality of loving compassion, all the ways I don't feel so good, and all the ways that I'm proud of myself and not proud of myself. And that to me is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about developing my consciousness, and that I know inside myself that having traced these pathways through sometimes, whether it's the yogic, like the universal principles of alignment, I'm making them very explicit, but having traveled those pathways from my mind into my body and from my body back to my mind, that it is directly linked for me into something much more profound than simply making sure my knee is safe. But I'm really super psyched about good knee alignment. You know what I mean? It's like, so I don't want to say, yes, it goes to the heart of God, but I'm damaged by the process of getting there. I would like to be pointed there, and then to have, to me, that process of biomechanical alignment is in the context of consciousness. It's not in the context of safe, unsafe. It's not in the context of right or wrong. It's in the context of self-knowledge and the capacity to have the refinement, the courage, the patience to learn a method of responding to what I'm finding inside myself along the way. So that means that those principles might have made deep back bends one year for some of us, and they ended up being back therapy another year. That they're really not necessarily always going to look the same way. But if we think about it, I didn't learn how to do poses. I learned how to pay attention to myself, to lovingly respond. I learned how to meet the moment, to be precise and pay attention without tension. Not like, pay attention to yourself. I'm on to you, Christina. You know, you got your knee, your thighs kind of forward, bad girl. Not that kind of thing. But like, oh my, isn't that so interesting? The way my pelvis can move independently of the top of my thigh. What else is possible? So not everyone is into all of that, but to me, I'm still interested in that. I still feel something new on my mat. I've been at this. I started practicing in 1991, started teaching in 98. And when I feel an articulation in my body that I didn't feel last week or yesterday, I'm still thrilled. And when someone else feels something in my class or can articulate it, still thrilling. I'm not bored of it. So I might be a very strange person, but that's why I'm here. And I just wanted to know, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the sequencing, but I really wanted to make sure that in the technique, to reiterate time and again, that it's in service to consciousness, and understanding and unfolding my own consciousness is in service to understanding where my place is in the universe and where we are connected, not just my place. But the more I have discovered my place in the universe, I have found that I am not alone there, that I'm in an inextricable web of interconnection, to, you know, quote the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and that we start to go, oh, the nature of this consciousness refinement is love. Paul Mueller just told me recently that another translation for Ananda, like Satchit Ananda, is love, not just bliss, but love. That the nature of bliss is love, not la 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 la, but and so to me, if I'm looking for that as a kind of evidence of the practice working, not just is my knee pain going away, but I got to tell you, I'm happy when that happens. Okay, so and I'm happy to avoid any suffering I can, and I know some suffering in life is necessary, so we're here to avoid the suffering we can. On the next page of this PDF, if you have it, and if you don't have it, then if you missed it somehow in the chat, or you can always send me an email, I'll send it to you. I wanted to cover that I have a few assumptions I made about you, which may or may not be true. And I just am assuming for this hour that you have interest in expanding your knowledge and skill set, that you're interested in reflecting on your own experience, because that's key. I'm going to give you my ideas. There's a principle in writing that it's easier to edit than it is to compose. So I would encourage you to reflect on your experiences, and you're going to be hearing everything that I say about how I do it through the lens of how you do it and how your teachers have done it, both positively and negatively, like what worked and what didn't work. And those are some of the best sequencing strategies. Lectures is the path of direct experience. I set it up this way. Everyone's poses seem to go well. I set it up that way. It didn't go as well. I have students talking to me in the lobby about this one felt good, or my back wasn't ready, so on and so forth. So that to me is a huge part. And I can tell you what I do, but you can use whatever I'm sharing with you as not a dogma, but as a springboard for how to do it your way. And that I also wanted to say that I'm assuming you have the capacity to apply general principles to your unique situation, because I can't, the variables are way too many to cover a how to sequence kind of thing, particularly in an hour. I'm assuming you have some sequence strategies experience, and that you're familiar with a basic template strategy, because that's a big building block in terms of first things first. And most of us learn in teacher training, many people now are getting set sequences when they come into teacher training and learn how to teach these sequences. And I think it's really good. A lot of systems actually train people like that. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. But in general, I'm assuming that you have a kind of overarching understanding of poses, of how to prepare in a general way through an arc of class that starts with general movement, puts the standing poses somewhat early, does some thigh stretching, maybe some hip opening before you do some back bends, some forward bends and twists, like this sort of natural full spectrum arc. If I just went through that very quickly and you don't have that, I can't teach you that tonight, but you could say, note to self, I need to get that information. And it's in the Anusara Yoga teacher manual. There's a lot of good information about that about that approach. And I'm going to speak about some of the Anusara Yoga terminology, so I assumed you have some of that interest, but if not, it's not necessary. I'll do my best to speak in plain language as I can. Also, I'm assuming you have the willingness to take what you can use and leave the rest, and that you have the maturity to understand that the depth and breadth of this topic is not approachable in an hour. So you're going to subtext, that's just me asking for your, generosity. And the next slide just says a moment of meta, kind of like want to cast the teaching light on a little bit of a meta about starting with that, is that's every class. That's every class that we're sitting down to sequence. As far as I can tell, there is really no one way to sequence a class, and it all depends. But we have to know, do we know what difference the difference makes to tag back to some of Douglas Brooks's teachings? It depends, but you know what it depends on. And one example of that might be if I was teaching in a scenario where the students were continually dropping in, and I didn't have a lot of regular students coming to a class, my sequencing strategy would be very, very, very different than it is to my regular Tuesday and Thursday night people or my regular attendees, because I have so much built over time with them that I don't have to start back from the beginning. They know the biomechanical terms, they know what the poses are. And so it's a bit of a moving target to know where to aim. But I wanted to show you that I made assumptions for how to present this topic about you. And I do that every time I'm teaching a class. Okay, it's Tuesday night. I'm assuming these people are going to be there. I kind of know this person's got a fragile shoulder, this person, that. And I'm not necessarily catering to them, but they're in my mind, because in terms of the primary purposes of the class, I want the students to, want to address what I know is going to be there. And so if I don't, and we're always surprised when we make plans, and there's always often things that we can't count on and plan for. So really, this is another example of that. Is years and years ago, people have asked me when I've traveled to give workshops, well, couldn't you just come in and do a master class and show you how you just teach a public class in 90 minutes? And as well, I could teach a class in 90 minutes, but it wouldn't be a 90-minute class like a normal class, because you're not my normal 90-minute people. So what I can get done in 75 minutes with students I've had for 5 or 10 years is totally different than what I can get done in 90 minutes. So again, all of these variables are too many to name. So, but I wanted to sort of talk and point us to some principles that we can use. And when we have a good principle, as we know with the universal principles of alignment, one concept such as muscle energy, when we really understand what that is, it holds so many things in one topic. So even with sequencing principles, I want to show you principles more than this is the way and this is exactly what to do. So when there's next one for in bullet points, I think I'm gonna just, and I'm gonna talk fast and I'm gonna get through it, or get what we can through it. But on the next slide, there's when sequencing to a peak pose, here's some things that I consider. And the first one is intention. And I want to go back from that big picture intention, even the purposes of practice, to know myself and to express that knowledge with authenticity, with clarity, with courage, with skill. So that's big picture intention, but I'm not talking about that. The number of yoga teachers that I talk to who want their students, when I say, well, what's your primary, intention for class? They say, well, I want my students to feel better. And I'm not talking about that either. Don't we all want to feel better? I mean, I want everyone to feel better, but I'm talking about your intention drill down to that point of focus. Like, what are you going to focus on? Not just, I want people to feel better. Okay, good. But how will that happen? And when I think about how do I feel better, pain goes away. I feel better. I get a new opening. I get access to a pose. I feel better after class. I have a new insight about myself. Maybe I didn't even have nothing really to do with the class, but it happened in the scope of the class. I feel better. Someone's wanting the slide to stay up longer. So that's, yeah, you can leave them up. I feel better when, you know what? I heard someone say inner spiral for years. And I actually have a story about this. Some of you've heard. I was in Atlanta with John Friend back in the days. And I think I might have even been certified at this point, honestly. And I was in the front row in this hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was teaching inner spiral. For those of you who don't have Anusara yoga training, this 3 component parts of inner spiral. And it's in your legs, expanding spiral in the legs, at that time was called inner spiral. And it's turn in, you move your thighs back, and then they move apart. It's more technical than that, but in, back, and apart is the salient part of the story. And I had passed the test. I had taught this to other people in my immersions, and I'm in this class with John Fred. All he's teaching is in, back, and apart, big, long, forward bending class, in, back, and apart, with some good talk about God and, devotion and that kind of thing. So I'm into it, I'm feeling, but about halfway through the class, all he said, in, back, and apart. I go, oh my God. And he goes, what? And I said, inner spiral. And he goes, yes. And I said, I feel it. And he goes, what do you feel? And I go, it moves in, back, and apart. And so I'm laughing, and some of you I'm getting some witnesses out there in the gallery, because I knew it intellectually. I had taught it to others who seemed to feel it. And I felt it more than I felt it before I had taught it, before I learned it. But I felt it in my body, mind. It was no longer a conceptual thing. It was mine. It was experiential. It was in my body. And I felt better. I want my students to feel better. I felt better after that. So if someone tells me, I want my students to feel better, I would encourage you to ask yourself, how does that happen? And what is that better that we're feeling? And how are we going to facilitate it with in our class relative to what our students are there for, what we've sold them as the class, what they might be ready for as best as we can tell, and also relative to our own personality style. So I really love learning techniques about alignment, and not everyone does. And so if that's not like your thing, but you're really theme based, then these principles will work for that. But the point of this principle is know what it is you're coming into class to teach. What point are you going to make? And so that's, to me, it's like, what's the primary aim for class? And that question, it's not a big picture aim. It's like, what specific thing are you there to share with your people? And maybe it's a theme, and maybe it's a teaching you got, and the class gets built around that. Or maybe it's, oh my God, I felt this thing in my outer hip and I wanted to explore that. And then I got out the book and I realized it's this aspect of this. And so it could be, but I'm really thinking about that. And that is in a lot of ways how relates to that open to grace principle, to the set the foundation and open to something bigger than yourself only, because it's the clarity. I remember years ago, the clarity of our foundation reflects the clarity of our intention. So the whole sequence is, the clearer we are about the lesson we're going to make, then the clearer the sequence can be the foundation of the structure that we're going to move all that Shakti through, all that energy through. So I consider things like that. That's that first bullet point. And then it's about narrowing the focus. And then I'm going to consider also, I'm going to go into these a little bit more deeply, but I'm going to assume what tends to go wrong in the pose, or what are, sometimes we call them the common misalignments of a pose. I also think of them as common tendencies or challenges. Like, what tends to just, where do we run into trouble? And of course, there's a long list of those for every single pose. So my sister and I, she's a yoga asana practitioner also, and she and I joke about what's hard about the pose is the pose. Right? Like, what's hard about Marichiasana 1? It's a forward bend with the leg in your way. That's what's hard about the pose, is the pose. What's hard about Virabhadrasana 1? I don't know, getting your back heel down, bringing your front leg to a 90-degree angle, getting a twist in your torso, getting the whole thing. So what's hard about the poses is the poses. So you just really have to look at the pose to go, what's hard about that? And then there's dividing points for me to consider, which is, there are classes where you make a hard thing easier. Take something challenging out of it. You've examined the pose and you've said, I'm not going to mess with that back heel alignment because it's just going to torque those people's knees. I'm going to do that on the ball of the foot today. I'm going to keep the hips square. I'm going to turn that back heel in Virabhadrasana 1 out of it. I'm not going to mess with that problem. And then there's other sequences that I'm very interested in, as how do I not just make the poses easier, but how do I create a sequence and a class environment that over time, the student's capacity increases so that it's no longer as hard of a thing because my skill has improved. not a little bit by a little bit over a long period of time relative to each person's capacity and interest. So I don't see that as a forceful thing. I see that as growing a capacity and changing the way that our nervous system understands the position that we're putting it into. And that happens slowly to recalibrate the nervous system so that it can accommodate these challenges. So it's not wrong to take what's hard out of it. It's not wrong. And a lot of how I prepare students to increase their capacity for difficult things is making easy poses harder and getting very technical and refined on poses that are in somewhat reasonable ranges of motion. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But the key things that I would like to have you keep in mind as you're watching some of the screens about shots about this, about the poses, is that I'm thinking to myself when I'm sequencing a class, another layer I'm considering is, what do the legs do in the pose? And then what does the torso do in the pose? And then what do the arms and shoulders do? It could be subdivided endlessly. It could be, what does the front leg of Warrior One do versus the back leg of Warrior One? What does the back leg, bent leg of Janu Shirsasana have to do? And what is this doing? The front leg doing? So I'm thinking sometimes I'm working the arms and the shoulders as a unit, and sometimes we're isolating what the scapula is doing and what the humerus bone is doing. So it's endless in the way that you can refine, but the principle is the same, and start to say, what is the job of the legs? What is the job of the torso? And what is the job of the shoulder girdle? And then what I'm looking at that point is where can I look for poses that teach those actions and relate to it through what I call the lineage of the pose, which is the next slide. The lineage of the pose is about every pose has this, what I call cousins or relatives. And so if you were to look at the Anusara Yoga teacher manual, and there's this syllabi are divided into 3. And honestly, I think that we would live good, happy lives in our bodies on the level 1 syllabus. I think the level 1 syllabus is fraught with challenge. It's got Urdhva Dhanurasana on there. It's got, I don't know if we get, I think there's 1 or 2 calf lotus legs on there. That's a lot. That's a big ask. It's got poses like Virasana. I mean, so really, they're difficult poses on that level 1 syllabus. And I am convinced that the grand purposes of yoga at the largest level of self-knowledge and self-expression, but all the way down to the physical functioning of a body can be had on that. This level 1 syllabus is a complete yoga education as far as I'm concerned. I think all the ranges of motion are accommodated, and you're not in sort of what I sometimes call the skinny ends of the branches. But in sequencing strategies, I talk about the lineage of the pose a lot, and I think of poses. So when I'm looking at Urdhva Dhanurasana, think about Urdhva Dhanurasana. I'll show you some of these pictures coming up. It's got what are the arms doing? Well, the arms are in the overhead plane, like this. Where else do I see that? I see that in level 1 syllabus in Urdhva Hastasana. I don't know if I'm spotlit here or not, but in Urdhva Hastasana, we see that depending on how I'm going to work my arms in Warrior One poses. I see that in, of course, Down Dog. So I'm looking before I'm expecting my arms in the overhead plane to be coupled with a big bend in my back. I'm looking to see where else does that show up that I could educate the action, help the student get bodies and nervous system get accommodated to the position before the stakes were really high. And the harder you make Urdhva Dhanurasana for years, the easier handstand becomes. So it's not just make easy poses hard for the sake of making things hard. It's because one of the biggest things that I hear when I read like the blogosphere, be afraid of yoga, be very afraid, advanced poses are bad, that whole sort of thing. When I read that, I sometimes think that they are risky. All of this is risky. But what I'm interested in doing is, if I don't ever straighten my arms in Urdhva Hastasana, and then I expect handstand to go well, it's not going to go well. But if I'm getting used to how to make my arms straight here, and if I'm getting my down dog really clarified, and I'm getting all kinds of, I really understand not just the shape I'm accommodated to, but the intensity of effort required, the focus, if you will, of the effort required, and I'm getting accommodated to that shape repeatedly, the gap between those poses, it's not as big. So it's making the easy poses more refined. This is mostly what I mean by harder. It's not just effort hard, it's the clarity of the refinement. Then it shortens the gap between the stuff where you're a little bit further into the ranges of motion. But if you make that a big gap, then they are much more dangerous. So I'm not saying that you can make an advanced pose safe. We're talking about risk mitigation. You can make it like you can, I think we can, and we have to have a lot of patience. So when you look at the screen on the sequencing strategy, Lisa's gonna, like my DJ here. There's a slide, my friend, you can go to the next one. Will you go to the next one for us? You can see this repetition of shape. And I wanted to show, so this is a little segment where I want to get you thinking with some visuals around the repetition of shape, because see how there's Paschimottanasana down there on the bottom, and then on your top left hand facing the screen is Baddha Konasana, and then Janu Shirsasana is one of each. So I would be interested in how they relate together. I'm not saying you should teach Baddha Konasana, then Janu Shirsasana, and then Paschimottanasana, but I'm saying look at how those have they're relatives of each other. That the more I understood, or my students could understand Baddha Konasana, the more they would understand their back leg in Janu Shirsasana. And the more they understood, straight legs, even one leg at a time, perhaps in Janu Shirsasana, they might understand Paschimottanasana. These start to go together. Their order for me, by the time you're dealing with me and sequencing, we're way off the map in terms of order. I do not think anyone poses a peak pose. I do not think anyone poses a preparatory pose. I'm off that. But if you're still on, it's a good place to spend several years of your teaching life. So I'm not saying it's not a beginning approach. But if I'm looking even at repetition of shape, it's not on that slide, but maybe you can see me, and I'm looking at Paschimottanasana. I also have Uttanasana. So I would be thinking about ways these poses. I also have poses like that Baddha Konasana while my hip's in a different position. I have that same very similar Baddha Konasana leg in tree pose. So I'm looking for a repetition of shape a lot. And where you find repetition of shape, you're going to find repetition of action. And so when you're going to make a point about something like outer spiral, let's say, or externally rotating your leg, or drawing to the midline, or any of the things you might want to make a point about, then I'm looking to say, oh, I want the sequence to make sense across that general template arc. But within that, I want it to be highly focused so that every pose that I'm teaching is contributing as best as it can to my lesson, and to helping the students know in body, mind, and in sort of their attention field where they're headed. You can look at the next slide here. There's some other little examples of where you can see repetition of shape. And we have in the first one, Parshvakonasana and Trikonasana. And of course, keep in mind, this is Darren Rhodes. It might look like, we might not say, I have got that kind of Parshvakonasana right off the bat. We've got forearm to thigh Parshvakonasana. That would work. And then, so you've got that. And then you've got your Trikonasana. And then see how it's very similar to this version of, okay, I didn't. Okay, yeah, to our Utthita Hasta Padangustasana. Got it together there. Yeah. Okay, to our Trikonasana. Okay, and then it's got a bent leg, but then you put it together with, you can see Darren's got it there. Yeah, then you have Vashisthasana, plain and simple. Then you could do a bent leg stage of Vashisthasana, and then a straight leg stage. So these aren't necessarily sequences, but I wanted these pictures to start to see, can you imagine when you look to the middle column down there, that if you took that Parshvakonasana of Darren at the very top left corner on your screen and tipped it, like turn it, you had it on a desktop publishing program, and you just put it up on his back leg, he'd be in that next pose. And if you just tipped Trikonasana up onto his left leg, he would be in Utthita Hasta Padangustasana. He would also, if you put his front leg, and then you could also tip him from Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana out to the side. That's not all that different to Ardha Chandrasana. So you start to see, if you learn Trikonasana and teach your students Trikonasana, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to carry through to teach a lot of other poses. You learn one pose well, that's in the same family, you know a lot about those other poses. And that's the value of understanding when we're teaching through our principles and teaching through, oh, it's going to create a link. And one of the things is when students have success in something in the beginning that's achievable, I'm trying to pave a way that says, well, you did it here, so you can do it here. You did it here, so you did it here. You did it here, so you should do it here. So it's educating the knowledge of how the student is going to do something. It's also educating the body, because the body is getting prepared, because ideally the sequence is building through, you know, slightly more increasing challenges. And also it's building with that a sense of empowerment. When students, so many people I train in teacher training say things like they want to empower their students. And I just don't think we can empower our students, but I really do think that we can create situations where the educational experience, the knowledge that rises up, the experience that rises up is incredibly empowering. So I'm not trying to empower anyone. I'm trying to give them information and create an experiential opportunity and a community that's interested in learning together, such that empowerment arises. But if I could empower you, it would be my power to give. And it's your power to find, to claim, to experience, and to move in and through. Yeah, the scaffolding. Okay, great. Okay, yes, I think it has terms. Becky just wrote, in education, the term they use for this type of learning is called scaffolding. And you love seeing this apply to yoga teaching. And every time in other sports, it's a lot of scaffolding. So now we have a technical name because we're educators. All right, you can do the next slide. Thanks, Becky. That's good. All right, the next slide has a lot of the same way. You can see how, or it's got a lot of arms overhead work. And it's also got, if you look at the top picture with Darren in Urdhva Hastasana, he's got the same pretty similar arm work in the shoulders and upper back and upper arms as is in down dog, as is in handstand. So you're starting to see that they have a lot in common. They're not bearing weight in the same exact way, but they have a lot of information that they share. That's what I say, that they're relatives. They have the same sort of lineage. And you can see here, if you look at now that second row, he's still got the Urdhva Hastasana arms, really, with his jazz hands. And, I had a conversation about that picture one time with John Friend. I was like, why isn't he in straight Virabhadrasana 1? And John said, oh, well, he could do anything. So I just thought that one had more Shri. And I was like, yes, but not all of us can do everything, John. Okay, you can go back. I'm going to say more. That's just storytelling. And look at the arms throughout that series. He's got his arms in the overhead plane. His arms and chest is very similar between Urdhva Hastasana, down dog, handstand, Vira 1 variation, Anjaneyasana variation, and Supta Virasana. And then all the way down at the end of Urdhva Dhanurasana. And then here, but if you go to the back leg in that second row of, if you put the pointer on Virabhadrasana 1, and you see the back leg of Virabhadrasana 1 and the back leg of Anjaneyasana, that is hip extension. And that is in common with Supta Virasana. And that is in common with what's happening there in Setu Bandha and what's going to be needed in Urdhva Dhanurasana. Now, in most cases, depending on the level of class, I mean, Supta Virasana that's a big pose. So I'm not saying you should teach that series. I'm just trying to give you the image of the repetition of shape, and you can play endless games with this until forever. And so I'm going to go a little bit quicker and skip the next slide until this next. Oh, I'm out of time. Okay, next slide. I'm going to show you what we have next here. If you go up again, I wanted to show here that a class that I actually taught in on Tuesday. And I actually taught it on Tuesday. It's called a level 1-2 class. And I was going to make a point in level 1-2 that night about hip abduction, about abduction for the hip in Ardha Chandrasana. So I was going to talk about this bottom leg. So this is a level 1-2 class with experienced practitioners, but it's level 1-2. So my peak pose was not something fancy like Urdhva Dhanurasana. My peak pose was Ardha Chandrasana, and we used blocks. So I wanted to make the point there that for our presentation tonight, that Ardha Chandrasana, sometimes gets, maybe it doesn't seem like a big peak pose and peak pose strategies, but for me, it's a very good thing to learn how to break down, as to scaffold, if you will, the level 1 standing poses is a really good place to start practicing this, because one of the ways I think that level 1-2 is how we kind of keep safe, keep interested, is make some of the more basic poses increasingly refined and start to prepare. So I've got students, and when I said that I make an assumptions about you, that you're interested, I pretty much make an assumption about all my students that they're interested. And what happens is the ones that aren't don't come back. But what has happened over time is I have a whole bunch of very interested students. So when I hear teachers say, well, my students aren't interested in learning, then sometimes it's the wrong learning environment for you to be working. Like there's places I've said, well, this is not something that's workable to me. The environment isn't conducive, but I am a little tough love on this coming your way. If I began to feel like none of my students were interested in learning, you'll know, because I'll quit teaching. So if I start feeling that about students, I actually check in about my own consciousness. Why aren't they interested? Am I not being interesting? Or am I giving them too much? Am I not giving them enough? Is it just unfamiliar? But here's the tough love part. But when it's like someone says to me, students aren't interested in learning, I think to myself, well, you're their teacher. So different things interest different people. Sometimes it's the alignment junkies. Sometimes it's the prowess. Sometimes it's the theme. But I'm always on the hunt of like, why are they interested in, and in what? And usually it's in all of that's in the same class. But I have interested students. So I teach these very geeky classes and they're interested in it. And then they go teach it to other people and we're very geeky. I think it's cool, but that's because I'm geeky. But all right, so I was going to make a point about this common tendency of Ardha Chandrasana. And in this level 1-2 class, the point is that it's not in level 1-2 that in that class, everybody pretty much knows Ardha Chandrasana. Not that it's easy, but knows the pose. So if I was having to teach Ardha Chandrasana from the get-go, like, hello, welcome to Ardha Chandrasana. I have 20-year practitioners in level 1-2. It's just basic poses, but it's very deep. So if I was teaching a sequence for how to teach someone Ardha Chandrasana from the get-go, that would not be this sequence. This is a class of people who can do Ardha Chandrasana, or they've seen it, they know the basic entry. And one of the tendencies in that pose is when we come into the pose, our butt, this leg comes off to the side. This inner thigh is behind that inner heel. And our pelvis hasn't turned on top of the femur. So I was going to make this whole point. I did make it. Big, strong leg, massive closed chain abduction. And we worked the whole class on turning the femur over your pelvis and getting the outer hips strong. So, and I had to make the inner thigh. I had to get the inner thigh prepared before I could ask it to move forward like this. Those of you in Anusara yoga, mental mindset about how I would put that in the UPAs. Muscle energy hugs the muscles all the bones on all sides. So firming the outer parts of the legs is part of that firmness of the muscles. Actually, when we place the four corners of the feet down, the peroneal muscles attach down there and the feet. So when you place the four corners of your feet and you have your arches, you're already in open to grace, set the foundation, four corners of the feet work, 1, 2, 3, 4, getting some firmness happening. Then you have muscle energy, which is going to tone the front, the back, the ins and the outs. but I would put this more into the lateral broadening, the apart part of inner spiral, or I would put it in the apart part of organic energy, because that's where inner spiral and organic energy overlap. With here, move your legs in, back, and apart. What muscles apart the legs? The abductors. And if the muscle energy goes from bones to the midline, your adductors are doing a lot of that work, along with your peroneal muscles on your outer shins. So you could funnel it into a UPA, but I just said all that stuff, and I'm looking at some of your screen, your faces, and you know Anusara yoga and you're glazed. So sometimes categorizing it in the UPAs is helpful, but the downside sometimes is that our analytical mind in Anusara yoga classes can sometimes interfere with our experience of the pose. It can set the experience free, but it can also be, I'm not in the pose, I'm wondering how to categorize the action she's teaching rather than feeling what it's going to do for my leg. And I'm not criticizing us for that. That's just like everything has an up and a down side. That's one of the things I've noticed in myself and in students I've trained in this. That's a potential pitfall of such a smart system, So I need to I know I'm going to decode the one thing I can't do tonight is talk a lot about the shoulder work, but that first part is a shoulder opening series about moving the shoulders, the scapula separate from the arm bones, moving the arm bones separate from the scapula. And so it is not necessarily, I'm not going to focus on that tonight because it's not part of the point that I would make relative to this sequencing piece, but it is, I do my best even within a peak pose to get as much full spectrum in there so that the primary joints like the shoulders, a lot of things get touched a little bit, but I want to make it a lesson. And that is not always easy to do. But if you skip to the next slide, you've got these pictures on the slide that are the part of like, okay, I'm going to teach Ardha Chandrasana. That's my intention. I'm going to make a point about abduction and adduction. I didn't call it an universal principle of alignment that night. And if you could order this class for me if you wanted to take it, but it's got a decent theme by the end, but I would not give this as, this is Christina Sell doing the best job theming ever. But this is a warm-up area. This is after we sat and did some little arm work and stuff. We did some lunges with lunge twists. And then we did some half Hanuman back to lunges. So we did lunge twists each way, lunge to half Hanuman. And then we did this rock back and forth in one-legged child's pose. And let's see, how do these pictures go? These pictures go on the left. Your first column is going down. So it's on the left in the top left corner and down. You've got a twist over your bent leg and then a twist away from your bent leg. Yeah. Then the next little piece, what's in red is indicating the pictures I have, not everything that we did, to show the repetition of shape. I've got this lunge back and forth, and I did it with a little movement and motion. I didn't do it fast, but a little bit of not just long hold, just a breath or two in each position. And then we did this one-legged down child's pose, going back and forth to get the inner thighs prepared. And then while we were there, we practiced with the outstretched leg, pushing down into the floor and drawing towards the bent knee to tone the inner thighs. Adduction, it would also be drawing to the midline. It would be the second part of muscle energy. And then we practice lifting the leg up off the floor to get the legs to fire. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is making sure over time that I'm wanting that experience I told you that I had in Atlanta with John when I went, oh my God, I feel it, I'm wanting my instructions. What I have found for myself is, as a student and as a teacher, is that if I don't understand what the teacher means by what they say, or I don't know how to do it, or I haven't felt it yet, it sits on top. And when a student tells me, oh, well, that person just talks too much, Sometimes they just talk too much because we tell stories about our dogs and all that kind of thing like I do. And it's just indulgent sharing. But when it's about the pose, everything I'm saying has something to do about the pose. And my experience is when those instructions come to me and I know how to do them and I know how to access them, then the verbal cues, if you will, the verbal instructions are support for the experience. But if I'm not feeling them, if I don't understand them, that's when I think it feels like it's too much, like the person's talking too much. So I'm looking for things like, okay, I'm not just going to tell you the cue is something like tone your adductors. Okay, but the information and the sequence is push your foot down and towards your knee or lift it up off the floor, and you get the action that's going to create the experience. So this sequence, you can kind of follow along, and I'm running out of time. I'm already gone over. We did some on the next page. We did this. We trained some hamstring recruitment. We rotated the pelvis on top of the femur, and we started practicing this on all fours, how to tone the hamstring, how to tone the gluteal muscles, how to rotate the femur. And that eventually becomes a standing approach like so, to be how to tone the hamstring, how to keep the buttock strong, your leg lifted, how to turn the hip. So that you're looking throughout this sequence of, and we run out of time. I need about 3 hours probably to go after this sequence. So my planning ran amok, but if you keep kind of flooding through this should show a little bit of a way that you could look at some of these pictures that to see like where the shape repeats and where the shape repeats, where the action repeats. And so we did this before we go. I just showed you, we did it with a bent leg to keep the hamstrings toned. We kept the hamstrings toned. We did it with a straight leg. And then we were training this inner thigh work in all fours to have it prepared. We'd already lifted our legs up off the ground in that outside line. So those are toned. And we've met it with trikonasana. We did some drills at the wall to tone, get the pelvis to move over the femur, so that you're looking at how to turn, put those pieces together after each little piece has kind of been pulled out of the hole. So I'm supposed to give you time to ask questions, and I didn't, and I'm not even through my sequence because I can't get anything done like this in an hour. But here's my website up there. And I hope that there's some information in here that's useful for you. And to get some information, sort of, some creativities stimulated. And if you did want to take, the other thing that's in this handout, as you go through it, you can absolutely send me some questions. There's a way that this same basic lesson became for my level 3 class the next day. That same basic lesson that you were just looking at about some of that lunge twist, that hamstring recruitment that I just showed, that became poses like Parivrtta Ardha Chandrasana. Ardha Chandra Chapasana, Parivrtta Ardha Chandrasana becomes the next piece. So it can sort of go, when you start to see the same nugget of a muscle recruitment theme idea, of an alignment theme, it can be, I usually get a week out of that at different levels, but it's just where I end up with. You can take it down to this little seed, and then it can stop where Trikonasana and Ardha Chandrasana with blocks is the big heave ho of yay, peak pose. And then Ardha Chandrasana, it goes to something much, a little bit like on level 3, it's a little bit fancier. Level 2, 3, we went somewhere else with it. So really the lesson was sort of the same, but how it got applied, there's endless varieties because, your adductors apply in so many different ways. All right, well, I've done it again. I know I have to turn this back over to Lisa, and she's got some announcements, and some people are saying nice things, even though I did not get to do as much as I wanted to. So hopefully you got enough to make it worth your hour. And I'm going to turn this back over to Lisa.
Yeah.
We need a sequencing strategies part 2 visit. So
Exactly. Yeah, you're such a wonderful teacher that an hour is not enough, and you're generously giving. So if somebody's watching this recording later, can they get a hold of you via your website?
Oh, yes.
PDF?
Yes, yes, absolutely. You can get a hold of me, Christina Sell 108 at Gmail, and that goes same with my website, ChristinaSellYoga.com. And if you were interested in taking either of those classes, they're up. They're up. Send me an email, and I'll send you the link to get there, so you could take them and so forth, like that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to hand back to you in just a minute, Christina, to say farewell. But what I wanted to do was let everybody know what's coming up. And then, of course, we would love for you to just mark your calendar for fall 2023. We will be in Estes Park, Colorado live. Come retreat with us in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And our planning team for Samudra Shakti, the live event in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, is Deb Payne, myself, Maduri Martin, and Kim Friedman. This is the QR code. If you hold your phone up and your phone's camera to the screen, you can take a picture of this code. And you don't actually take a picture, your phone's camera recognizes this QR code. And then it says, hey, do you want to open this in your browser, whatever your browser is, whether it's Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're using. And then you open it up and you can join our watch list. And we will send you all the details as they come up for our live event in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, where you can retreat and just enjoy nature and awesome yoga with phenomenal teachers. So thank you for joining us for Samudra Shakti Online. I'm so glad you were with us. I'm handing this back to Christina Sell to give us a final farewell out.
All right. Thank you so much. That's a lot of good stuff happening. And bring your hands together in front of your heart, please, if it's safe and comfortable for you to do so. Rest your thumbs on your sternum. I know we covered a lot of information, kind of like rapid fire. And so I'm happy to continue to answer questions as we go along. Best way to learn sequencing really is, probably in class rather than in a lecture, but hopefully I got something that'll be useful for you. My current experience right now as a teacher and as a practitioner and as a human being on the planet, and on a planet that's suffering, is that there is difficulty, sometimes very personal feeling, and sometimes collectively overwhelming. And the promise of yoga is not that that suffering goes away, or that justice is always easy to see. But the promise of the yoga, as I see it, is that we can grow bigger. We can grow hearts big enough to hold it all, to hold ourselves lovingly, to hold one another lovingly, to have clarity for necessary distinctions, boundaries. And that in that growth, we can be courageous to stand for what's right. So let's practice our time together, and our practice, if we will, tonight of learning. Help each one of us move closer to ourselves. Find the ways, the means, the skills that we need to live in alliance with the depth of our hearts. May we hold ourselves in love. May we learn how to hold each other in love. And whether it's your big toe on the sticky mat, a kind dinner, a phone call with a friend, may you feel the power of love, of grace, and of support. The root word of namaste is nam, and it means reverence. So with reverence for what holds it all, for what holds us all. Namaste.